I'll concede your point just for brevity, but
What? Brevity? We don't do that around here. It's probably
No.
citrus, or what is a Capital One Bowl? It used to be Citrus Bowl, right?
oh my
Capital
God,
One.
dude, where have you been?
I just like the real name.
It hasn't been the Citrus Bowl since like, what, 2002?
What was your highlight side dish from Thanksgiving?
Oh gosh, Scotch.
This is the Buck Around, the podcast devoted to all things Wisconsin Badger football from a fan perspective. Featuring your hosts, Richard Branch and Maxwell Brusky.
And hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Buck Around. Welcome back to episode 310 of the Buck Around. I am one half of the Buck Around, Richard Branch, and I am joined, as always, by my hair-triggered colleague, Maxwell Brusky. Came at you fast there, didn't I, Max?
Big time, I know. Whoa.
I was like, we're starting. We're going. I mean, not that...
You didn't even have a chance to think of a good adjective there.
I liked hair-triggered. You didn't...
I like hair triggered too, but
dare
it
you
was
say
it was very topical and timely.
It was of the moment.
Yeah,
you
very
could
of the
say.
moment. Yes.
But yeah, how are you? It's been a little while.
It has. There's has there been a lot going on in the world of Bucky football?
Yes, sort of.
Yeah. Relatively, yeah.
But at a distance, I think. That was the funny thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, we haven't talked for a week and a half. Lots of things happened. But then I'm like, well, yeah. But
I was kind
sorta.
of thinking the same thing.
But
there's,
sort
like-
of.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, like, we're going to do it. You know what?
Yeah.
I took an inopportune vacation that sort of threw us off in terms of timing with Badger spring practice, which, by the way, it would not go over well in the Branch household if I said, no, we can't go away on school breaks because it interferes with the Buck Around and Badger spring practice. So we're going to have to live with that.
That's understandable.
But
It's all about priorities, man.
it is. And clearly mine are, in the world of this podcast and my touch point for our audience, I think they're going to be disappointed, but they got to live with it. But here we are. We've had some things happen in Badger football. Should we just start right in? Let's just start with roster changes, because we obviously had one that, happened moments before you and I hit the red button.
I know.
But let's start with the subtractions first. We've had
Sure.
some transfers. I think. I guess we could start with the working our way up in terms of excitement, or I don't know if that's the right word, or impact or reaction. Okay, TJ Bowlers is gone. No surprise, obviously. We don't think either of us really have to say that. I feel like we were sort of looking at a last gasp for this guy, right?
I suppose. He's still 2 years, I think, right?
No, he's got 2 this year and next.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I thought. So it's not quite a last gasp. It kind of plays into if he's not one of the 4 or the 5, we're looking for 5 or 6.
Right.
If he wasn't one of them, that tells you kind of how far off he was, right?
Well, it just...
Or I guess we don't know that he wasn't one of them.
He wasn't one of them.
But I was just going to say it's a reasonable inference to take. But if he's not them, we can come back to it later. But roster impact minimal.
Agreed. I think at this point.
But it is interesting because he came in with he was highly touted.
Yes, that is the term they use.
Yes, I think he was very highly touted actually. Yeah,
he was very much in the 4-star.
I'm just going back to the Phil Steele.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
But
and I bet if I pulled it back up, he'd be in like the first 4 or 5 guys from that class.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
So, to your point, you could always be at the, misevaluation, but it kind of felt like that one was always a guy who was fighting inevitability, because you're always like, he's 30 pounds heavier than every other linebacker.
Right.
Why is he still a linebacker?
Right.
And I think we even said it when we came back. We're like, why isn't this guy a D lineman?
Yeah. Well, you know me, I always go back to when he's standing next to Darian Varner, and you literally, but for their numbers, you could not tell them apart.
So we'll see. He's 290 pounds ish. Maybe he finds a home, but I feel like he's a guy. My assumption is he's just way behind on the hands. They're like, Bud, we can't. I have a feeling this was it might be a good time to find a home type of thing.
So here's two things, right? If Leonard was the coach, or if Leonard had stayed, do you think it would have been any different with bowlers? I don't.
I don't.
But I'm just throwing it out there. I don't know if, because you'd have to think that Leonard was one of the main recruiters and had him in mind and put him through started putting him through positional changes and body changes. I don't know.
I don't think it plays particularly differently, just because his issue was that he couldn't get ahead of guys. Like, as an outside linebacker, he couldn't pass guys who, there was opportunities to play.
Yeah.
There were opportunities on this defensive line to play. That's for
Yeah.
sure. And he didn't play. So,
yeah.
I mean, we'll see. He's going to go down, I think.
I kind of think so too, but that was kind of the other thing about it, is I wonder if there'd be room for him at Iowa, where his body might have a little bit better chance. But if you're right about the hands, then probably not.
I think it comes down to, and you would know better than me, is what does that defensive line room look like at Iowa, and what's the space? Because I feel like last year, Iowa's portal moves were very much guys who, we have a space and we need someone to play. I mean, they did a very good job in the portal last year, quite frankly.
Yeah, right.
And I feel like it's tough to say he is a guy that's going somewhere to play.
Yeah.
There's no proof of concept.
No, there's not. No, there's not. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I feel like, and we'll get to it in a second, post-spring portal players are different than pre-spring practice portal players, in my mind. We'll see.
That's an interesting way to look at it. I think you're right.
So let's go to the second one, if you're all right. Because we've talked about a guy who's barely played a lot. Like 4.5 minutes on PJ Bullers.
I know.
But
I know.
like
Well,
you said,
he's been with the program for a while, though. So
yeah, and someone you were always hoping would boil up.
Absolutely.
All right, Nick Evers is the other one.
Even more highly touted.
Even more highly touted. Top 10 quarterback in his original class back at Oklahoma. 1+ years in Matt. Do we call it 2 years? He did 2 springs, right? So
it's 1 year. 1
season, 2 springs.
Yeah.
Nick Evers, we hardly knew thee. Feelings, thoughts.
I don't know if I feel like it doesn't. I'm really not moved by it. It doesn't change a lot for me, but I feel like I'm being stupid for saying that.
Well,
I don't know what I'm missing, though. I mean,
I don't think you're missing anything. I mean,
I don't think I am either.
When they brought in Braden Locke and Nick Evers, we said one of these guys is transferring out, right? Like, they're not staying.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's not surprising. Yeah,
and he's consistently been behind Locke. He's not passing him. He certainly wasn't this year. And if he wants, the thing I don't understand is they have said in media availabilities, the coaching staff, like, oh, he's learned the offense, he's picked it up, he's in a much better place than he was a year ago. I don't know what transferring now does. It just feels very hair-triggered to me. Like, I don't know what the advantage is of doing it now versus waiting to the fall. Because if you're not that far, and they kept saying, patience, when Longo was asked about it, he said, he just has to have patience, and, he's getting better. He can be a good quarterback. It's going to take time, right? And I still think in their minds, he was a longer-term project. Mm-hmm. Maybe another year off that he's fighting for that job. Because I still think this thing in the end ends up being Tyler Van Dyke, right? Worst case scenario, next year you're the 1-2 battle for the starting quarterback job at Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. I don't think you get much of a better opportunity now. I saw he's going to he's visiting UConn, right? So is that the move? Do you go down and then maybe work out and come back up? Is that the he's going to go to 4 colleges? Maybe
it's hard to tell with and there's a couple there's some basketball parallels I think there too. Where you just look at these guys where it's like, gee, you're going to be in 4 schools in 4 years,
right?
So you might have all the talent in the world, which I mean, it seems like he does, and from all the observers and reporters of those in a official capacity, said that he looked the best that he'd ever looked, right? In
Right.
terms of chucking the ball around, moving around, running, all that stuff. Because that's the other thing with this guy is he had the feet, and that's something that the other quarterbacks don't have.
Right.
I'm saying that I'm being kind of smarty, but
I
I
don't think
just
they
I don't
do.
think I just don't think you miss much here.
I think they were trying to praise patience to the
Mhm,
guy and or preach it, but
mhm.
maybe just wasn't. It doesn't seem receptive to it. I mean, I do think the other part of that's a little tricky is, and it kind of ties into the next thing. It's the offensive line being so hamstrung in the spring. It
Right,
makes it much harder for him to work when he's not working with the ones and only working with the twos and potentially working with the threes because he's dealing with an offensive line that's kind of all over the place and
right.
doesn't have the depth of the position groups they're lining up against. And maybe the idea was, my shot isn't gonna. It's just not gonna happen because I don't get an opportunity with what's around me. That's the only other. There was only thing that made me say like, maybe that's why they're doing this now, and maybe this is a shortcoming of where the offensive line is at this point. That's what they got to go do,
Well,
right?
offensive line depth.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
be clear about that.
I mean that with the shortage on the offensive line beyond the first five,
Yeah,
it makes it harder for a lot of these guys. Like I got to imagine with the running backs, right? I mean, if you're going 8 deep at scholarship running backs, you're kind of like, what does this mean for a guy like Nate White and Tuca, who's in, who's a freshman in this thing? It's got to be a little exciting when you have tryout, offensive linemen sort of muddling their way through who
yeah.
don't really know what you're doing. So, yeah, I mean, that's maybe the thing that this is a long, meandering way of me saying, like, maybe that muddies the water a touch on
A
the
touch.
thing.
You're not, but yeah, but you wouldn't go so far as to say like the guy never got a chance.
No, 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 no. I'm not suggesting that at
Yeah,
all. What I'm saying
yeah.
is, I mean, here's the way I guess maybe what I was saying is maybe, I mean, I think, and he said it himself, he put himself behind the 8 ball coming in. He didn't know the offense. Like he was behind in his football knowledge, which,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the way the statements he put out when he transferred, it felt like it was written by whatever. That's not something a 19-year-old writes, but whatever. I don't care. But I mean, there was sort of an ownership of, I didn't come in where I should have come in, more or less, or I didn't progress the way I should have progressed that first spring. So he put himself behind the 8 ball, and then he just couldn't catch up. And if he's still working with a semi-functional offensive line, it's like, well, I'm not going to catch up if I'm not working with a functional offensive unit. So, I got to hit the button. But even with that, it's like, I circle back to, I don't know what he gets by leaving now versus, September saying portal, right? And then you have a whole different sort of window of opportunity there versus April.
When does a window close again?
8 days. I think it's the 15th to the 30th.
Yeah. Okay. Like taking a little bit more time to stay here and finish out the spring, basically.
Well, what I'm saying is your potential pool of, and it ties into the guys we're going to talk about coming in,
Mhm.
the potential pool of landing spots and what they're looking for and what they're after is different than it's going to be in, 6 months, 5 months.
Yeah.
When if you announce it in September and teams are looking around, like I think you have a little more flexibility because there's a lot of teams who have already done their portal work at that position.
Yeah.
So now it's teams patching holes or teams willing to take a flyer. Not necessarily, you have fewer opportunities or fewer options to choose from. And if you stay for a year, what's the downside? If you stay through the spring and into the summer and into fall camp, the offensive line's going to get a little deeper, right? Because you're going to have more guys coming in. Plus, they're going to add they've added one transfer body, which we're going to talk about in a second. Maybe they add another one. It gives you a little bit more functional offense. It puts you on a little bit more level playing field. And hey, worst case scenario, you set yourself up into the fall like, all right, do I have a real shot next year? Maybe he didn't think that. Maybe they decided like they're going with Locke and we're done.
I'm gonna go with that. I think.
Yeah, I mean, but that's what they decided.
And I would think that where your choices are maybe a little bit more limited than they would be in the fall. I don't know how much more limited. Maybe I'm missing that, but I don't know how much more limited they'd be. But then you also get a chance to get a jump on the summer and the fall in a new place. I don't know. I can't. I think there's going to be a lot of podcast space, airspace, airtime chewed up by trying to figure out what's in transfers' heads.
Right.
So it's
fair enough.
We're out on a limb.
Yeah, we totally are. So let's get to something that's actually coming in. All right, like 10 minutes before we hit the record button, Leighton Nelson, guy from Vanderbilt, announces his commitment to the Badgers, redshirt sophomore, 3 years eligibility. I think he played something like 60 snaps at Vanderbilt in 2 years, but coached by Blazek, so Blazek knows him, known quantity, in he comes. They needed to do this.
I was going to say it's another body.
It's interesting. Here's my question about it in terms of maybe not what it means, but like I'm trying to answer this. Why do you think they're getting guys now? Right? Because they got this Nelson guy. They are talking to the kid from Illinois, Joey Okla, who's I think he's from Heartland, right?
Okay.
He's an in-state.
I don't remember him being an in-state kid, but okay, yep, okay.
Why do you think they're doing that now? Why wasn't this something that happened in December, January? Like, why didn't they get bodies? I'm not talking Leighton Nelson, because obviously he put his name in April. And I'm not talking Joey Okla, because he put his name in, same thing, last week or whatever it was.
Available scholarships, maybe?
No, they have them. They have to get down by the fall, but they're fine now.
And they would have been fine then?
They would have been fine then. They were at 88, and that included the guys coming in the fall. So they had 4 or 5 spots. I think it's... this is going to sound... I think you're dealing with everybody who is operating on a plan B, right? Because you weren't going to bring in anybody in December and January under the, hey, come on in here, guy, and be a depth player for a year and maybe compete for a spot next year. Like, that was the sell. I mean, that's what you had because they have 4 spots settled, 2 good-looking players battling for it. That's sure you could jump into that mix, but I also think they have to massage guys like Ben Schwal and Brunner who've, been around for a few. You can't like throw another body in there for them to lose their starting job, I think, when they both look like they can probably start. So like, I don't know who you could get now. And though these guys are like, oh geez, I got to leave, right? Because they both left after spring, which means they're buried in some way. Or, maybe Okla's homesick if they actually get this guy.
Mm-hmm.
And he just gets him closer to home and, hey, I, always wanted to play for the Badgers, yada, yada, yada. But, like, these are bridge guys, filler guys, right? Like, I mean, I'm not assuming, I think at this point, you can take what you get. You need this one and one more, because that gets you to 15 scholarship offensive linemen, which is more or less where you want to be, right?
Sure.
So they're at 14. If they add Oakland, they get to 15. But like, you're not looking for these guys to come in and compete for anything at this point, are you?
I can't imagine. No.
Certainly not this year.
No.
I mean, maybe they're in the stew for next year just because they're going to have to replace so many.
Well, as I was saying, there's open spots next year.
But that's all it is. I mean, like, it's.
I don't know. Yeah. If you say like plan B, it's like, that's what was available. And I don't. Do you know if they struck out on anybody? I don't remember. No. I'd have to go back and look.
They're swinging for that defensive lineman too, the kid out of Kent State. I mean, they're doing stuff that is not a surprise to you or I. They need offensive linemen. They need defensive linemen.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, it looks to me like it's funny that defensive lineman from Kent State, and I don't know why, but I look at him differently than I do these guys, because it's like, I feel like for these guys, it just feels like for everybody, this is a plan B all around on both ends of the arrangement. Like these guys, I think they would love to be going somewhere where they have a better prospect of, getting a shot at a starting job sooner or a contributing spot sooner, where I think that the water's a lot murkier for them at Wisconsin. And I'm sure with the Badgers, they'd love to be getting guys who they think maybe, have been in a spot where they've been fighting for a job more versus playing 60 snaps over 2 years at Vanderbilt, right? So, hey, I think it's a good thing. I think they need to do it. They got to get some guys who can at least compete at the G5, at the P5 level, P4 level, whatever you want to call it, but nothing more than that. I mean, this is Rob's roster depth.
It is, but you also, I mean, you do have the advantage of playing for the current O-line coach too. I mean, that's
correct.
I think that's
for one of them.
That goes a long way, and it might have altered what the overall plans were. Because that situation was still in flux at the end of the year, right?
Yeah.
When did they hire Blazek? Wasn't until like February.
Right.
Yeah. So maybe that had something to do with it too. Because can't, who are you going to, well, what are you going to say? I mean, you're going to come here, but we don't know who we don't know who your coach is going to be.
Okay.
Maybe. I don't know.
I think a lot of guys would just look at it and say, I can go play offensive line in the Big Ten.
I think so too.
At an upper half of the Big Ten program, right?
O-line you.
So let's get to spring practice, right? We've been yapping our way here about transfers. Let's actually talk about what's been going on in the field, or what we're hearing about what's going on in the field, because we're not going to get to see it this year. I mean, we have no word of a spring anything yet.
No, it's kind of weird, isn't it?
Well, I think that it's going to go quietly in the night at this point. But
yeah, even still, it's still weird.
Yeah, but
even if it's something where you buy the ticket and all the tickets go to a charity.
Well, that's what every spring game is. Yeah,
I know, but like you don't have that either. You don't have that.
Well, they don't have a place to do it. That's their problem. The Badgers are constantly updating and upgrading this field. I don't understand why, but that's not. They just did the turf like 4 years ago, and now they're doing the turf again.
Yeah. I didn't know that they had something where the stadium isn't usable now.
No, they're putting in heated turf.
Right. Okay.
To make it ready for hosting playoff games.
Well, how long does that take?
Enough time that it spring practices in the McLean Center or on the grass.
I guess so.
But so let's talk about it. So we got Fickell. Since we recorded, I think we've gotten 2 Fickell availabilities. We've gotten Devin Spalding, who, boy, almost put me to sleep. Paul Haynes, which was really interesting. Nate Letton, and Matt Mitchell, who was the best. Like, I could listen to Matt Mitchell talk all week. Like, that guy was awesome. It's funny, like you when you hear him talk, you're like, oh yeah, this guy was a head coach for 12 years he had like opening. He was like Fickell. He had like an opening statement, and then he answered questions for 20. I mean, these other guys were doing like 8 minutes. He did 20.
20, I know. I thought Letton had a similar vibe actually, and if he's not a head coach, he's like one of those dudes who's like head coach material.
He seemed a lot more comfortable. I mean, I think the last time, was it all the way back to last spring was the last time we got him? Maybe. But
I don't remember, but that would make sense.
But even if there was, it's irrelevant. Like, listening to him now, he was in the fall too. I think we heard him in the fall. But listening to him this spring versus last spring, it's a lot less tight. Spalding is still like, we're working hard.
You can tell he's young, though. I mean, he's just doing the best he can. Yeah. I thought the funniest part of the Spalding one was when Temple asked him about what his conversation was like with Shad.
Right.
Like, we're going to keep that between us. And I'm trying to think and I'm thinking to myself, like, so what, like, state secret was in that conversation? Like, why would you do that? It sounded really weird. And when he kind of looked back to, like, take the next question, I was picturing, like, once his eye contact turned away from Temple, like Temple was like, what?
Well, the question wasn't even that. It was just, was he coming back from the get-go, or was there some back and forth on it? And it wasn't even like a big one. But it was funny, like how he didn't even want to touch it. All right, but let's get to some things we've heard this week and what they mean. All right, number 1, I put on there, Fickell says they have 4 D linemen.
When I saw you say that, it was before I watched it. And I watched this availability. I didn't watch the one on April 9th.
Right. Yeah.
I didn't watch the first one. So I went to go pull up the roster to do this right. Because as I'm sitting there myself, I can't think of them off the top of my head. I need to look at the roster.
Well, I can get through. So he gave you 2. He gave you James Thompson.
Yes. What did he say? Who's working through something right now?
He's, working through something. But so he's kind of in and out. Then he gave you Kurt Neal. And he said, that was one he gave you. And Ben Barton. So Ben Barton, Kurt Neal, because he said something to the effect of, Ben is working and pushing and yada, yada, yada. So the question is, who is fourth? Because you look at who's left on the roster. You'd like it to be Elijah Hills, because that's the guy they brought in, right? You'd like him to be leapfrogging people to play.
I would hope, yeah.
I'm pretty confident. I mean, I know it's not Ernest Willer, because they talked about he's on the threes, and he's sort of hitting that, freshman wall a little bit and, learning things. Mike Jarvis is theoretically in spring, but I have not heard his name once. Jamel Howard, his work. They said he's working 2s and 3s. I've seen enough in practice reports that he's working 2s and 3s. So, that leaves you with Elijah Hills or Cade McDonald, right?
Yeah.
That's
Cade
it.
McDonald was the first one I thought of. But
me too.
He seems really unknown.
But he's a guy who, last year he played, all I can tell you, I'll pull up his snap count. It wasn't a lot. 89 snaps last year. Most he played in a game, 16 against Iowa. That was it. Okay. So maybe it's him? I don't really have an answer for you, but it's
Redshirt senior.
Yeah.
Cade McDonald is.
Yeah, and it's kind of a bummer that Hills isn't pushing. Like, you really needed him to hit. So we'll see, maybe by the fall he comes around, but you'd also like to see more than 4 defensive linemen, because theoretically they're going to be playing a lot of 2. It's going to be a nickel set. From everything, all the conversations.
You said we have 4, and we're looking for 5 or 6, so.
Yeah.
5 and 6, excuse me. You know what, too? I'm trying to think. Just from reading reports and seeing the highlights and stuff like that, I haven't seen Hills mentioned that much.
No.
Right?
Not really.
You haven't? Yeah, no.
Maybe there's been some injury stuff, but I don't know. I just feel the fact that he hasn't been mentioned is notable.
Yeah. Yeah. Noteworthy.
All right, let's go to DBs. We're just going to sit here and trail off into speculation land if we keep going on that. But
right.
Maybe on the positive side, for me, I feel like the team has done very well at corner. Paul Haynes, his line was, we have 4, maybe 5 guys who we trust to go on Saturdays. A lot of praise. Both he and Fickle mentioned Nizer Forkerine. I guess I didn't know this, that he had a big surgery and was slow out I think it was over the summer, right? Last year, but he was really slow to sort of get up to speed, and he's put on weight. So much about people putting on weight. He and Delancey talk about weight. So I guess we know who the 4 or 5 are, right? Don't we?
Mm-hmm.
It's Hallman, Forkerine, Delancey.
Delancey for sure. He's been getting a lot of run in a lot of pub.
Yeah, and then I guess DeClona would be 4, and maybe 5 is Arnold, or maybe Michael Mack, because that's the one.
I think it's Michael Mack. I think it'd be Michael Mack, because he had a lot to say about him too. He said he's a team dude.
He said he's a team dude, but I don't know what that means, because they also have a lot to say about Max Lofi lately. And
that's true.
I don't and as I said, I'm curious how many guys are ahead of Max Lofi, because I know what Max Lofi is. It's okay. I know he's had injuries, and they're talking that up, and that he may be in a different place. But if there are 4 or 5 guys better than Max Lofi, it's a good cornerback room. It's got a lot more depth to it than it had last year, right? They're not going to run I think Hallman can get a little bit more of a breather, which would be
Rico?
Nice. Yeah, who's not playing this spring. And what's interesting, if you think about it, he's not out there. He's not running out there at the spring. So everyone you're seeing out there probably gets notched down one. And that's, definitely gets notched down because he's the best corner they got. So
right.
I kind of actually feel a little good about the corners. Is that weird?
No, it's weird for this team, and the whole time you and I've been doing this. Right.
And then the only other one I thought that was interesting, and it's a guy that okay, I'm going to put him away in a cabinet for a year and not think about him, was Snowden. Did you hear what Haynes just called him?
Baby Great Dane.
Yeah, was it a great? I thought it was like an Irish setter.
No, it's Baby Great Dane.
I think he's all legs and floppy.
Yes, yeah.
It just was such a funny line. He's a out of control puppy dog. So Let's see. As he said, he's physical, but he's got to learn feet. So okay, that's a fine way of saying the guy's still super raw. So we're not going to see him for a little while. So put him away. But other than that, like, were you kind of, the only thing, I was kind of surprised Michael Mack isn't a little more top of the list.
Yeah, me too. Especially since he like sat out a year.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess maybe, you know what it is? Maybe I got a little bit, because Forkerine worked out so well, I think, all things considered. I mean, he came in and was a really solid player who,
Oh, yeah.
you know, I mean, he pushed himself over Alexander Smith, but I feel like maybe that biased me a little bit, that I expected them to do really well with defensive backs in terms of identifying and bringing him in. But I mean, if Forkerine's good and Delancey's good and they miss on Mac, I guess like that's kind of unrealistic for me to expect them to bat 1,000.
Yeah.
You know, maybe this, or maybe he's just a depth guy.
Delancey would be one of the people that if there was a spring game, I'd want to see, because they really have been talking about him a lot.
Yeah. I'd be curious to see him at 190 pounds too. Like that's like, oh, okay, that's
right,
interesting.
Right. Now I made a point of talking about that too.
Yeah, and how much weight he's put on. So good news from defensive backs, right?
Definitely good news from defensive backs.
Nate Letton. Let's talk about his tight ends, because I do think it's interesting. You want to start? I just am curious what you think about what he said, what he was talking about, where he's at, what you divined from it.
You have it in here, and you know the biggest change is offense from the old system to the new system, and I think that's
what he said.
Yeah, I think that's pretty interesting.
Do you?
Yeah, because what does that? I mean, what does that mean? They had like hardly any tight ends they could use last year. Yeah, and it's not like they were involved. So what is a new system? And how much do you have of guys that you can use now? I mean, I think they want to have Grant Stuck be a Tucker Ashcraft freshman player again, and it sounds like that. But what else do you have beyond those guys? You talked about JT Seagraves, he's got a ways to go. So yeah, you have work in progress. Work in progress is, I think, a good way to put it. I just don't know what level of progress are they going to get? A little improvement out of Ashcraft. Nowakowski's, I'm sure, you know, he'll be adequate and competent, but it's not like he's a star.
No, I mean, well, here's a question for you. Who had the most receptions at tight end last year? Do you know?
We did this exercise.
It's not a lot.
No, but I think the answer is a guy who is the Hayden Rucci, right?
Yeah, I was about to say Nolan. Yeah, it's Hayden Rucci.
Yeah. Well, Nolan did have one.
He had 11 catches.
Yeah.
And was clearly like a square peg in a round hole in that offense.
Yeah.
And did all things, you know what? He did his best and did not complain, was a good soldier. I can't knock him. After him, it was Nowakowski with, I think, 7. And then whatever. Ashcraft didn't have a lot. He had a few, but he was sprinkled in. I mean, I'll have to, now that I say it, I feel like it's weird that somehow Ashcraft was behind Nowakowski, but he was. No, he had 8. He was 1 ahead of him. I knew I missed him.
Okay, so 11, 8, and 7.
Yeah, I mean, 11, 8 doesn't change the whole. It's not exactly.
Jake Ferguson had 3 game stretches that were like that.
Yeah.
I'm just throwing it out there. There's no comparison between any of these guys and him in the offenses,
so anyways, I was kind of like toying with this, and how I was thinking about after his availability was the one that I thought about the most afterwards, because I was like, what does it mean? And I'm like, I don't know. Can I say I did not get a good feeling that there is talk of adjusting from the old to the new in year 2?
Yeah.
Like that doesn't, there is no old system anymore, right?
Right. There shouldn't be.
I was kind of like, okay. And, you know, so he got talking and he, you know, mentioned McGohan, but they're like, McGohan needs to put on weight still.
Yes. I did like the pronunciation guide though. I didn't know it was McGohan.
Oh, you think it was McGowan?
I didn't read it. I remember, didn't you post the pronunciation guide?
Once,
in a tweet? Yeah.
It was TJ
But I don't remember seeing him on it because I thought it was McGowan.
Yeah. It looks very Scottish-y, you know. Like
Patrick McGohan.
Yeah. Like it's gonna have like a funny, like you collapse it down.
No, but yeah, I think it's pretty clear that he's still got a ways to go body wise. But I you know, there was one of the tweets that came from the football account was, you know, a like what looked like a touchdown pass from Van Dyke to McGohan.
Yeah.
And it looked like, oh wow, you know, it looked kind of competent and just like something you really hadn't seen a lot of in a while.
So you got that. As you mentioned, I think I think there's two things. One, I think they really want Grant Steck to figure some things out because they'd like to use him. To your point, use him like an Ashcraft. But
Yeah.
I think the big thing here is a lot of this tight end room rides on Tucker Ashcraft. And they need him back, and they need him healthy, and they need him blocking and knowing how to block. Because I look back, and the fact that they were putting that guy on the field last year who could not block tells you a lot, like what their options were. And if he can sort things out a little bit, they're going to play him, because the term he used that really sticks out in my mind is he talked about guys trying to find their role in the offense. And what I think that he's like, are they a guy who's a receiver who's going to stretch teams, or are they a guy, who's a little more push them? And
yeah, I forgot what phrase he used.
He used a different.
Too. Yeah, I forget. It was, but it was an interest. Anyway, it was an interesting.
It
one.
was like an edge setting, more traditional tight end talk.
Yeah,
I forget the term. And when he says guys are trying to find their roles, I feel like it means they don't really have a skill set that matches what they want. So that's more on the walk-on side, but we'll see. I think this one leaves me very lukewarm.
Well, like you said, it's work in progress.
Yeah.
And, and I just go back to it too. I mean, I don't know how much, with the different bodies or different skill sets they would have recruited. It's just that position just got so messed up by injuries and just a two bad cycles of recruits, that didn't pan out.
I mean, the only guy that you play
being rebuilt.
Yeah, who you're like, maybe this isn't the type of player they would have recruited, or maybe they would have worked with him physically in the weight room differently, would be Hayden Rucci. Like, that's a capable player who can play tight end, but maybe not the way they want tight end to be played.
Right.
But the rest of them were just so many swings and misses that you're just like, I don't know. Right?
No. It's the only position on the whole team that's being like just completely rebuilt.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it.
Yeah, a running back would actually come close.
Well, so
but I don't even think running back was nearly as bad as this was.
Yeah, so let's talk about running back for a second. I mean, honestly, like that Devin Spalding, we already talked about it. Whatever. Let's just talk about the running backs.
So you get is that like a John Settle award for running back coach?
Yeah, but John Settle actually gave good interviews. That's the irony.
I suppose you're right. Yeah.
He would actually just say whatever. He'd be like, yeah, this guy isn't playing hard. He needs to work harder. And you're like, wow.
Yeah.
That's better than let John Settle talk once.
That's true. That's true.
So what do you think the running back room is going to look like in the fall? I mean, is it it's like a 3-back thing, right? Like, I'm assuming Malusi 60%, or maybe 55, Walker around 35.
Oh yeah.
And then and then you got whatever's left there, right?
Yep. And I think with whatever's left, I think they'll just you can't say a hot hand, because when you're carrying the ball twice a game, it's not, you can't develop a hot hand, but I wonder if it'll be something in practice or team specific or skill set specific. But yeah, you get excited about all the names and what you're kind of seeing with Matuka, and I don't know how excited to get about Nate White, but he's getting some run,
getting some pounds.
The pun was intended there.
Yeah,
it wasn't a good one, but but you get excited about, and then you got the 2 freshmen coming in. But I feel like it's one of those things where you, in a different time, trying to think of another analogy where you get excited about a position group, and it'd just be like, nope, it's just 2 guys basically.
I could see that.
Yeah, that's what I foresee.
Well, you know what it feels like? It feels very much like they're trying to replicate what they would have had last year if Malusi didn't get hurt, and you had Allen and Malusi, because Walker is a little, just like what little bit of highlights we've seen of him. Mm-hmm. He's a powerful guy, but he's a little more twitchy than Allen is. I think he may not be as much of a battering ram as a running back, even though he's a big dude. Like, I don't think he can do the Braylon Allen sort of fall forward thing that he especially did early in his career when they had nothing on offense, and it was just push Braylon Allen, through the A gap and let him fall for 3 yards 38 times a game. Like, I don't think Walker is that kind of power back. Like, I think he's more of like a bursty power back where it's like lower a shoulder and knock a guy over, but maybe he isn't like, the 3 yards in a cloud of dust. I don't know if I'm making sense there, but
Yeah, I get like some PJ Hill vibes almost from him.
yeah, but I still think a little bit more. He looks a little more athletic than PJ Hill, I guess is
Sure. Okay.
what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, I think with Malusi and Allen, you had a cut guy and a power guy, and I think this is Malusi's still your cut guy. Walker's a little bit more power guy, but he's also, I think, a power guy who looks like he might be a little more comfortable catching a football.
Yeah, I thought so
Allen.
too. Yeah.
I mean, just because you saw him make a catch, and it just looks a little more flowy and natural.
I think even the way that Spalding said that in his somewhat incommunicative style was because what did he say? He's like, oh yeah, he can catch the ball.
So I feel like, Malusi can catch a ball. If Walker can catch a ball, I'm very curious to see what happens. Like you said, I'm wondering how much is left there, and if it's like 4 guys fighting for it. Like I don't think it's anything they have to resolve now, unless it's an issue of keeping people around, right?
Oh yeah. No, I fully agree with that.
But
unless it's an issue of keeping people around
that you want around.
Yeah.
So the one I had, like, I still come back to with this, like, Jackson Aker looks a lot like Riley Nowakowski. Like, why isn't he over in that room? Just put him over. Like, I think it's a good use of him. And it's a good use in that room where they need help, and he's older, and they trust him enough to use him, and he seems like a good soldier who just kind of wants to be around.
Yeah.
And he could do enough at that position if he could block. It just makes sense. But running back is okay. We know what it is. I'm glad Chez is back. I think that's going to be... It'll be interesting to see, because he's going to be the number one guy, at least in the beginning, and to see how that works. But
do you think you'll see out of Aker, Iacobelli, or White a transfer out of them?
That's the place you'd be looking, right?
That's what I feel like, yeah.
Because here's the thing. If they bring in a second offensive lineman, they need to find 3. Because they're at 87 right now as we're recording. If they still have an offer to that Oakland kid, and he accepts, that puts him at 88. So they got to get to 3 by June, which is basically...
Yeah, okay.
But the reality is they got to get down 3 in the next 8 days. Or
yes.
Plus or minus. So that position is certainly one you're looking at. I mean, it wouldn't shock me. But you got to find 3 somewhere. There and wide receiver would be where I think you're looking. But before we... before we get too sidetracked on that...
Yeah.
What? You have a thought?
Well, you said wide receiver. I don't want to go have a whole wide receiver discussion because there isn't really much to say.
There isn't much to say, though.
No. I just thought it was cool when Paul Haynes said something about trying to keep up with Will and Tretch.
Yes.
That's who he said.
Yeah.
He said Will and Tretch.
That was the second name
Those
he
are
used.
the guys. Yeah. So I thought that was noteworthy.
Yeah, no, it's funny. That was one of my notes. I was like, oh, the 2 names he used, Will Pauling are obvious, but then the next name he uses is Tretch.
Tretch.
The only thing maybe at wide receiver that I'm a little kind of head scratchy at, like, there isn't, I feel like we know nothing more about what's going on outside. It's a lot of people cycling through it, and it still feels like nobody's kind of percolating up. Like, there are guys I can tell that are down, like Tommy McIntosh is down. I mean, he's healthy, and you're not really seeing him. Chris Brooks, we're not seeing. Although
he is healthy too.
I was gonna say, is he hurt or healthy?
I don't know. You could always assume he's hurt. I don't mean that. I'm not trying to be snarky.
Yeah. Well,
when I say that, but
that fall or no, last spring, he sort of showed up and then got hurt and then disappeared. But I mean, it's like Quincy Burrows, CJ Williams, are kind of floating around there, and Bryson Green seems to be quietly just doing his thing, like he's set and done.
I've seen a lot of Quincy Burrows though in the highlights and in the had a good practice day today, that kind of thing. I've seen a lot of him. I think he's probably one of the guys that'll
see snaps go up. But
yes. Yeah,
we'll see. And then the only other part was I thought Matt Mitchell was really interesting, if not so much for what he has, because he was pretty straightforward. He's going to play 4 guys, and I think we know who the 4 guys are. I mean, here's the thing. Here's my question for you. All right, so he talked a lot about Leon Lowry and John Pius. A lot of that was because he was asked about it. But he did mention the only guy he is cross-training to, both the field and the boundary. I forget what he called them. The Sam and the Jack. Sam is the field linebacker. Jack is the boundary. The only guy who's cross-training is Daryl Peterson. Why do you think that is?
You don't think it's because he is a more flexible player, so you can keep him on the field more?
Do you think that's what it is?
That's kind of what I would take from it. Yeah, because I think the way that he talked about John was that he had coming his he is making a big transition,
right, from FC.
And I think that's not. I don't know if I'm saying it the right way, but that's what I took from the way he talked about Pius. And I don't know if that translates into those guys being more like straight line, limited, good pass rushers, but not as good as linebackers, whereas Peterson has more of that, or if Peterson's not as much in favor. I would take that to mean that you want Peterson to have as many snaps as you can because he's your best guy.
I thought it was interesting because he talked about Pius and he said what he said was kind of what you said was that he is the best pass rusher, just pure pass rusher.
Yeah, I got that. Yeah.
And he's like, he's really good at that. He needs to learn how to be able to drop in coverage some, how to set an edge, that kind of stuff.
He even said specifically that at William and Mary, he was like,
Never
all he was asked to do is just kill the quarterback, basically.
Yeah, he's like a glass cannon.
And I think he said never, or he didn't say it like I just said it, but I think he said he's never had to drop into coverage. I think he said exactly that.
Like he is the ultimate glass cannon. He does one thing or that's it.
Yeah.
And then it was funny because he talked about Leon Lowry and said that he's going from 3 positions to 1 because he played 3 positions at Syracuse. Now he's going to 1. But then Peterson, I just thought it was really interesting because he said, how he was talking about the prior year, they didn't have depth. And he basically, it was really, he said we didn't have depth, like CJ Getz, he even said like CJ Getz is going to be a player I remember for forever because no one should have played as much as CJ Getz. He got, your unsung hero.
Yeah, I know. No, that was, I'm glad you brought that up because I didn't really know how to take that. It was like he was overused, and I felt
he said
he
worn
didn't
down.
say we did him a disservice, but that was really what I got. Like we let that kid down,
and
we didn't use him properly.
They didn't have the depth, right?
Yeah,
and so what was the depth behind that? Here's the thing: it was TJ Bowlers, it was Caden Johnson, and it was Jeff Petrowski. 2 are in the portal, and the third one is done with football, as far as we know. So it was an interesting thing to say, but the reason I was asking about the Peterson thing is he also, when he was talking, again, great media availability, go watch it. He was talking about like ideal bodies at outside linebacker, and he's like, you really want them 6'3" to 6'5", and you want to get them to 200, and I even wrote down the weights, 245 to 260. Do you know how tall Daryl Peterson is?
I think we talked about this before. Isn't he 6'2"?
6'1".
6'1". Yeah, I knew he was shorter than 6'3", but yeah.
And you know what the other thing was? Mitchell said, well, sometimes we can go outside of that. We can go under there. We can do 6'1", 6'2", but you got to be really twitchy. Would you call Daryl Peterson twitchy?
No.
I don't.
It's not like he has no twitch, but when I think of him, I don't think of twitchy.
I don't think of him as, snap off the line twitchy. No. I think what's happening, Leon Lowry and John Pius are the starting outside linebackers. And then Daryl Peterson is going to be like the third guy who rotates for both of them.
Yeah.
Which I think that's actually kind of a good spot for a guy like that. I think he's a good fit for that.
I think so too.
Because I'm assuming the fourth guy, because he talks about him so much, is Aaron Witt. But I do think Aaron Witt is going to be a different player than Pius and Lowry, especially because I do think it's like a different position where he's almost like a run. We've talked about it, like he's the run set edge. And it's almost like Daryl Peterson is the rotational guy. I'm divining a lot here. Who knows if it's right, but it feels like, okay, Daryl Peterson will be the third guy in passing situations to keep people fresh or in any kind of, situation with ambiguity. And Aaron Witt is much more stay-at-home, big, stout dude. Because they even talked about he and Peterson were both being talked about being used as linemen in like a 3-tech, which, again, I think has more to do with the defensive line.
Yeah, right.
But in those sets where they're using like 5 linebackers.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to me. They have a rotation if they can keep everybody healthy. Right? You've got 4 there, and I think you have some complementary skill sets. He was also big in Heiberger. Let's see.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
Heiberger sneaking. I like the way he described it. Like he's a guy, and I think it's something also because he talked about. I didn't realize how much special teams he does because the way he talked about special teams, there was a lot of ownership in it.
Yeah, I know.
Like we didn't kick right, we didn't do this right. He's basically the special teams coordinator, I think.
Kind of sounds like it. Yeah. Well, and he kind of touched on at least 3 of the 4 teams, didn't he?
Well, he did. He talked about. He's like, we got to get better we got to punt better.
Yeah.
Like he even said the bowl
game. We didn't even block a punt last year.
We didn't block a punt.
Close.
We didn't flip the field when we punted. And then the kicking, it's what is it? Distance, hang time, and location. He's like, you got to get 2 out of the 3 and you'll do well. And he's like, and there's a lot of times where we didn't. But it was just so funny to hear him talk. I was like, oh my gosh, I guess he's doing everything.
Yeah.
But Heiberger sounds like the next man up. Which
Definitely.
Is interesting. Because again, after this year, they're going to have to get linebackers again next year. Because they're going to have 2 scholarship outside linebackers.
Yeah, I know.
Assuming Lowry, or maybe Peterson stays and maybe Lowry stays, but like those guys are transferring for a reason. We'll see. But there's a good chance they'll be down a lot of bodies.
He did seem really particularly excited about Witt, though, I thought. And I shouldn't even say that. He was like, you could tell he thinks it's a good story kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like he's really part of the team and he really brings a lot just for going through what he did. And I think Mitchell looked like particularly impressed by that.
Yeah, well, you know what's interesting? It was the way he talked about Witt, it kind of in comparison to the way Haynes talked about Max Lofi. Like, there was never, like, I mean, maybe it's just the words that Haynes used where he's like,
sure.
If this wasn't going to happen, it was like, we had to decide if there was a place for Max.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? Versus with Aaron Witt, it was that sort of wasn't a question. It was always like, this is a guy we want back. And they all seem to, even like Fickle too, when he talked about him, when they brought up the fact that he hasn't played football in 500 days or whatever it was.
Yeah.
It was an interesting, like there is definitely, like they seem to like him as a player.
Yes. Yeah.
I guess for lack of a better term.
Well, you're talking about between this position, tight ends, running backs, like that last staff really had some bad luck because I feel like so much of that was bad luck.
Yeah.
And like when they come in, when those classes came in out of high school, you really thought they would have done better. Obviously you would have, but I feel like, and I don't know if we can go over it by the numbers sometime, and I feel like we have, and I'm maybe forgetting that, but it seems like they just had a disproportionate of injury guys like the Cam Larges and the Max Lofis and the Aaron Witts and just odd situations like Logan Brown, and things like that, where it was not quite as typical. Or I think they had like a higher washout rate with all those classes. You know what I'm smelling, Mac? What are you smelling? A summer project. I know. I think so. Yeah. Well, you're also softening because this is a different tack for you on this topic. I feel like pretty consistently in the past you were harping on misevaluation, and now you're I don't know what it is. Maybe it's I don't know if I've taken a different tack necessarily, but it's just when we're talking about these position groups, it's like there was a lot of injuries in there. Yeah, there's a lot of them. Anyway. All right, so this is where, but we're not going to do it. We would probably be like, what are you feeling about spring? But let's not do that. You know why? We have shows coming up, and we can do a little how the sausage is made here. You and I have sort of 3 things we want to do. 4, well, I guess 2 of them are related. I guess it's 4 things, but 3 things that we wanted to do, and we should decide what we want to do next week. We wanted to, 1, do a depth chart, which I think we probably have to wait to the end of spring, right? Because we're going to, maybe there's an injury or 2 or somebody retires, I'm assuming. Somebody retires. Yeah, like there's a medical red shirt. Something. Yeah. We wanted to do an optimist's case and a pessimist's case coming out of spring. Yes. I thought that was a good way to look at it. And then we wanted to lastly revisit our 5 things from going into spring. What do we want to do next week? How far down are terms of next week? We're looking at Tuesday. I'm out of town Wednesday through Friday. So we are on I think like practice 11 right now. I think is today. So we're not quite done. with spring practice.
Yeah, so we'll be at like, let's say, I don't have the schedule, but I think it'll be like 13 at that point.
Yeah.
So we'll have 1 or 2 to go.
Do we want to go next week, or should we wait till the week after?
We could do either, Max. Or here's what I have a different way to put it. Here's what we'll do. I'm going to put a call out. I am curious to hear from listeners where their headspace is at this point in spring. Maybe this is something it'll help spark some discussion. Tell us what you're feeling, because we are we're settled into year 2 of Luke Fickell. I feel like there's a little less surprise and a little less intrigue. Like there's not so much that's new.
Yeah, and on that I do have thoughts.
Make your
just from listening to him. Yeah.
Make your case if you're optimistic or pessimistic, because I'm actually really curious to see where people are at. Like, because there's a lot of things kind of going around. Like you alluded earlier to the basketball stuff with NIL, because that's like so crazy. It's so different than football.
I feel like it is, yeah.
And how, especially for the basketball team, what's going on. So like you have that going on. This beer that all I see people keep talking about is this collective beer. You haven't seen it? Like
no, I have.
It's getting so weird. So you have that part of it going on, and like that, there's a lot of anxiety around that, but then there's also some questions around the team. So I am curious to hear from people what you think's going, like where your head is at. Like I really am. I have no idea if I'm in step, or if I kind of have thoughts that I'm holding back a little bit for our pessimistic stuff. People might be surprised where the Prince of Darkness is on that, or they might not. They might not.
They might not.
No.
Well, that was also one of the 5 things, though, too, at least for me, is like the vibe.
Yes. So,
the vibe. Yeah.
I'll be curious to see what people are thinking. So maybe we get enough there and a few things happen that we kind of cobble together a show. Like kind of what we used to do, where we'd have like 3 topics and each one is 10 minutes. So send your thoughts. You can email the show, buckaroundpodcast@gmail.com. You can just go to buckaroundpodcast.com, use the contact form, hit us on Twitter.
Patreon.
You can send us a message through Patreon, whatever. But we'd like to get some thoughts. That we might sort of like pick a few that we think sort of summarize what people think. But so
or just our questions too.
Yeah, or questions.
Yeah. Or a specific item, specific item questions.
Or even just like, hey, this is what I'm pondering right now.
Yes.
And we'll all ponder together.
Little conversation starters.
Yeah. So there we go. Let's do that. There's a little show production.
It's a little sausage there.
There it is.
Sausage. Yep.
So I think on that note,
bacon sausage.
Let's go make sausage on our own.
On our own time, yes.
Yes, I don't know what that means, but
I don't know, but I think it's time to go.
Yeah, this show's ending very uncomfortable.
All right. Until the next time.
Until the next time, my friend.
Enjoy the conversation? Head on over to buckaroundpodcast.com to find all the ways to connect with the show, links to our Patreon page, and feeds for every major podcasting platform. We want to thank each and every one of our patrons. You make this podcast possible. This has been The Buck Around, Badger football analysis from a fan perspective.